Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 91 of the Feeling Good podcast. Last week, David, we rebroadcast this interview by Roy Germano, and where you talked about how you published your book, Feeling Good, and you have an even more interesting, if not at least as interesting story about how you went from the publishing, where the book was kind of lingering for a while, until it became a success, and that took a while. So, and you have quite a bit of stories to tell about this, how you went from lingering to success, and how you kind of overcame the hurdles, including the psychological hurdles. So can you tell us about this?
Yeah, it came up actually last night. I was at dinner, a birthday dinner for someone in our Tuesday training group, Mary M, who's a lovely woman, originally from Iran. And as we were sitting at dinner, someone said, well, tell us, how your book became a bestseller. What was that experience like? And so I began to explain what had happened. And then at the end they said, oh, you've got to turn this into a podcast. People will really want to hear this story. So that's why I thought we could go ahead and give a crack at it today. People have fantasies about what happens when you write a book and publish a book, and you think you're going to get all of this support and all these wonderful things are going to happen. But about the time my book was published, my editor, Maria, called me from William Morrow and Company, which is now merged with HarperCollins, and said that their company loses money on 90% of the books they buy. And they're just hoping to make money on that 1 out of 10.
Yeah, it's almost like a venture capitalist.
Yeah, same deal, yeah. And that the president of the company creates a loser list of the books that aren't going to have no potential to make money. Right. and that the books on the loser...
Let's not invest too many resources into those, right?
Yeah. Well, she said actually they're going to invest zero resources into my book, which was number 1 on the loser list.
Yeah.
And, but she said the only thing is that they had contacted 10 popular magazines.
So you were the biggest loser.
Yes, that's right. The biggest loser. And 10 popular magazines, and, to try to sell for serial rights. Cause like if you can get a chapter in, Ladies Home Journal as an article or something, it sells a lot of books. Mm-hmm. And she said, all 10 magazines rejected my book. Uh-huh. But here's the name and phone number of one person at each of these, magazines. And so to get myself started, I should call them all and try to persuade them to publish a portion of my book.
Yeah.
And so I got on the telephone and I would call like Ladies Home Journal or, Cosmopolitan magazine or, and
what year are we talking about now?
This would have been, 1980.
Okay. That's how old were you then?
Well, I was born in 42, 38 or something, or.
So you're still pretty young, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, I would get some secretary on the line and I would say, oh, this is Dr. David Burns. I have this new book, Feeling Good, about treatment of depression, and I thought it'd be really great if your magazine would, take a chapter from the book and publish it in your magazine. And could I speak with this editor, so-and-so? I had the name of some editor. And then the secretary or receptionist would say something like, Dr. Burns, we consider this to be telephone harassment. we rejected your book, and it's highly irregular for authors to call us like this. Please never call us again. And then they would hang up on me. And that happened 10 times in a row. And so when I went home, I was jogging home from the train station. I was feeling pretty low. And, the reality of publishing a book and my fantasy suddenly was War of the Worlds, and all my dreams came crashing down. It's
not as cracked up to be, yeah.
Yeah, and I started shouting out loud, "You're a loser," while I was jogging. And then I would shout back, "No, I'm going to be a winner. I'm still going to be a winner."
That sounds like an externalization of voices.
yeah, something like that. And then when I got home, I said, "Melanie, we've got to go out and celebrate tonight. And we'll go to a real fancy restaurant." And she says, "Well, why? What happened?" And I said, "Well, my book's on the top of the loser list, and Morrow will not do any advertising or marketing, no book touring, no nothing. And I'm going to have to try to promote it myself, which I don't know how to do. And I just today called 10 magazines they told me to call, and they all hung up on me and said not to call them back."
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, then why should we celebrate?" And I said, "Well, you don't need to celebrate when you win, when you're successful, because you feel so terrific already. Where you need to celebrate is when you're being screwed over, when you failed big time, because that's when you
need to drink myself to sleep right now."
Right. You need a little pampering, a little support, a little love, a little comfort. So we went out and had a real fancy meal.
Yeah.
And that led to 8 years of trying to call radio shows or television shows or anything to try to get some kind of marketing or promotion for my book. And I just had, rejection after rejection. And I eventually came to hope for rejection, because at least if they reject me, they'll remember who I am, and they might change their mind later on. And I had this
That's an interesting angle on that.
Yeah. So I just got hundreds and hundreds of rejections. And there was this really wonderful woman, Mary Lovell, who used to do typing for me. And she had a Selectric typewriter, IBM. And I don't know if you remember those, but it was the first to have a little memory in it.
Yeah.
So I actually edited Feeling Good by hand, with, cutting and pasting and rearranging things.
Yeah.
And then I give it to her, and then she could smooth it into a draft. And she had a lot of authors that she was typing manuscripts for, and I knew a lot of them were getting on television and getting a lot of publicity. So I asked Mary Lovell, I says, how do they do it? What's the secret to promoting a book? Because I'm, having zero luck with this thing. And she said, well, here's what you do. You try to get on even some insignificant little thing, like maybe you could get a paragraph in a Sunday church bulletin about your book, or maybe you can get on a little radio show, the nonprofit station with 200 listeners, and get someone to interview you. Just some little thing. But she said, what you do is, after each interview, write back to the person, send a thank you letter for the interview, and tell them what a tremendous job they did and what a tremendous interview it was, and how much you enjoyed working with them, and you'd always be delighted to work with them again in the future. And she said that's the way you'll do it, because you'll be able to get some little interviews now. But if you make those people feel good, they'll eventually get on a more prominent media source, and then they'll remember you and they'll invite you back.
Okay, yeah.
And so I started doing that.
You made your interviewers feel good about feeling good.
Yeah, feeling good about themselves rather than trying to promote myself.
Right.
And
so you were already learning the 5 secrets.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So I brought a dictaphone and I started getting little kind of insignificant interviews, but started doing this. And then, I actually got on a TV show in Cleveland. That's a real easy market.
Okay.
Because a lot of people don't go into Cleveland, but they have really nice, morning TV show and radio shows. Yeah. And I was able one day to go to Cleveland and get on the morning exchange and a couple of radio shows all on the same day. And after the morning exchange, the producer, it was one of those things, you sit on a couch with these two pretty people, kind of chit-chat about depression and suicide or whatever. But they were really nice.
While people are having their brunch.
But they were really, really nice to me and seemed to appreciate the fact that I was there. And then the producer said, "Oh, could I get some help from you a little bit? Do you have time?" I said, "I'd be delighted to." And then she explained that she had just adopted, I think, a 12-year-old girl who was a real troublemaker, this girl. I don't want to label her, but, she had severe behavioral problems.
Yeah.
And she said that her daughter, the girl she had adopted, kept running away from home and screaming at her. Yeah. And she was very depressed and said she felt like a failure and a bad mother. And could I help her, with this? And so I sat down with her for about an hour and we did externalization of voices and helped her talk back to her thoughts, and she seemed to appreciate it. And then, when I got home to Philadelphia, I sent her a real nice thank you letter, and, what a joy it was getting to know her and appreciated being on the show and, my typical thing. I sent it to her. So anyway, the book came out in 1980. They published very few copies and it would sell out right away. And then I'd let them know, by the way, you can't get it anymore. So then they'd print a few more thousand copies and it would sell out. It just kept doing that over and over again. It's just small, spurts like that.
And is that because of your TV appearances?
Well, no, it was by word of mouth.
Okay, yeah.
People liked the title, and then when they read the book, a lot of them were helped by it, so they would tell other people. So it was really spreading by word of mouth. But when I would do a TV show like that, like in Cleveland, it probably sold several hundred copies, maybe in Cleveland that day or something. But for the most part, it was very slow. And then in 1988, which was 8 years after the book was released, and it had, by this time, probably about 30 printings, reprintings, all very small. I got a call from that woman from Cleveland. And she said, do you remember me? And I said, oh, yeah, I sure do. How are you doing? And how's your daughter? And all of that. And then she says, well, I'll tell you what happened. I was just asked to produce the Phil Donahue show, so I moved from Cleveland to New York today.
Wow.
and I want you to be my first guest.
Wow.
And if you can come a day after tomorrow, I'll give you the whole hour on the Phil Donahue show. Wow. I said, oh my gosh, this is like a dream come true.
Yeah.
And I said, what would you think if I bring a patient or two along? And she said, oh, that'd be great. These were in the days where you could kind of do that.
Yeah.
Just more ethically questionable.
HIPAA did not exist.
Yeah, right. And I had this really nice guy that I had just started seeing 3 weeks earlier. And when he came into my office and sat down, he just started sobbing the very first session. I've never seen anyone cry so hard. And he was telling me he was a wretched human being and a failure as a father and a failure as a husband and just horrible. And he was just shaking. But I had asked him, I had just bought a camcorder and set it up in my office. It was brand new. I said, do you mind if I just turn it on during our session? Because I would just want to see if it works and we get a video. And he didn't care, so I turned it on. I thought, boy, this guy, he sounds so horrible. And then when he went out into the waiting room, his wife and 2 children were there. Mm-hmm. And his children ran up to him and started climbing all over him and just saying, oh, Daddy, we love you so much. and stuff. And I said, gosh, for a bad father, this guy's not doing bad. I think he's got some distorted thoughts going on. Well, he happened to respond really fast, just, every now and then.
Yeah, right.
And I had just seen him the day before, and I knew he was euphoric. And so I called him. I said, would you go up tomorrow, and go to New York and be with me on the Phil Donahue show? And he said, oh, I'd love to do that. So he came up with me, and I also brought a colleague, Tony Bates, with me, who was a psychologist in my clinic. And so and I brought the video of him sobbing.
Yeah.
And I gave that to the producer. And then at the break, between the first and second segments, they had taken that freeze frame, an excerpt on a half of the video, half the screen, showing him sobbing uncontrollably, and the other half showing him laughing in euphoria on the show just a few minutes earlier. And so after the break, Phil Donahue came out and said, was that really you? And did that really happen? And he says, oh yeah, that really happened. Phil Donahue said, well, how long did that take? That must have been, months or years. And he says, no, it was just 3 sessions. And Phil Donahue said, that's impossible. He said, well, it really happened. And Phil said, well, you're really feeling this high? The guy said, I'm just in a state of euphoria. And then a woman in the audience raised her hand, and Phil called on her. And in case you don't know, the Phil Donahue show was before the Oprah show.
Yeah, that's right. We need to probably tell people.
It was syndicated into 270 markets and had a gazillion million listeners. It was the biggest TV show of the era. And this woman raised her hand and said, oh, are you the David Burns who wrote the book Feeling Good? And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of what the show today is about. And she said, oh, well, my son was very depressed, and he was planning to commit suicide, and someone gave him a copy of your book, and it changed his life. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful to you. And I just want to say to everyone who's watching the show, everyone in America should go out and buy a copy of Feeling Good today. I couldn't believe my ears. And in the first 5 minutes, at the end of that show, it sold vastly more than it had sold in the whole 8 years combined, and went to the number 1 spot on all of the bestseller lists. Yeah. And so that's how Feeling Good became famous.
Well, your editor was right, because you went to that woman in Cleveland.
Yeah, well, that wasn't my editor. It was Mary Lovell, the typist.
Oh, the typist.
Yeah.
I mean,
she was the one who gave me the secret.
But she was editing your prose, no?
No, she was just typing.
Just typing.
I edited, and she was just a really nice person and to work.
So now she was right.
Yeah, she was right.
Because that woman went from Cleveland to the big leagues.
Yeah,
and so you did too.
Yeah. And I don't know what the teaching messages are, but and I'm not a motivational speaker, but it has something to do with the fact that people, they say, oh gosh, he's so lucky, and he sold over 5 million copies. His book is in 30 different foreign languages all over the world, and they think it's kind of like this magical thing. And I guess some people do have some fantastic break where they become famous overnight, but mine involved an awful lot of rejection and having to just continue to believe that I had something that would be of value to people.
Well, I think that there's a teaching that's of interest to our listeners, which is that for 8 years you just didn't give up.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have had, negative thoughts that said, it's never going to work. I am a loser. It's true. They were right. I might as well give up and so on. But
yeah, and sometimes I felt sorry for myself too.
So, but you kind of like, overcame that. You went back to reality.
Yeah. And, just hung in there. I had one other similar story, on that. Are we out of time, or I can give one more example of the same thing?
Yeah.
I then started to get where I could, they would like tour me a little bit, to try to line up some some interviews, but it was still very difficult. And I remember they sent me to Dallas, Texas, and they had a woman there who was going to drive me around to my interviews.
Yeah.
And I said, well, she said, how many interviews do you have? Because I guess a famous person would have like 8 or 10 interviews, just one after the other from TV, radio, cram all the.
Yeah, right.
And I said, well, I only have 2 interviews. And she said, well, let me see what they are. And she said, oh gosh, this is a little radio station. It's about 20 listeners. And, this was not very good either. And she said, why don't we just walk into the Dallas Morning News and demand an interview? So I thought, if you want to try it, I'll try it. And so we went in and, a security guard and she said, oh, this is Dr. David Burns. He's here for an interview for his book, Feeling Good. And the security guard didn't know the difference. So I said, oh yeah, we can go up to this such and such a floor. So we went into this department where, they had like the human interest type people. And it was just this huge room with hundreds of reporters and things.
Yeah, the stereotypical newsroom people typing at desks and so on.
Yeah. And so we went to this desk and she said, oh, this is Dr. David Burns and he has this book, Feeling Good here. And he'd love it if you'd interview him. It's about, new treatments for depression. And then they picked up a copy of Feeling Good, said, we already rejected this. We were not interested in your book. And I just died, and I felt so sorry for myself and kind of frustrated and angry. But then the woman that I was with said, well, if it's not a good one for you, who else can we talk to in this room? Maybe there's someone else with an interest in depression or psychiatry or such and such. And she said, well, they said begrudgingly, oh, you can go and talk to so-and-so, but I don't think he'll be interested either. So we went over and talked to this other fellow, and he said, I'm really busy now, and I'm not at all interested in you or your book, and, please go away. And it was very, a little more polite, but that was the message.
Yeah.
And again, it was frustrating. And then I said to him, taking a page out of this woman's book that was, driving me around, I said, well, do you know anyone else here in the newspaper who might have an interest in depression or suicide or new treatments? And then he said, oh, well, there's this woman, so-and-so. You ought to go and talk to her. And so we went and we found this woman, Hispanic woman. And I said, I have this new book on depression and suicide and new treatments. And we were just hoping that someone would be able to interview me. And she said, when I was 14, I tried to commit suicide, and I would love to hear about your book. And she said, let's go in this room. I'll get a photographer up here right away, take your picture, and we're going to do a big spread on your book.
Great.
And we were almost out of time, so we went in there and they got the photo, and then my driver said, well, I've got to get him back to the airport because he has a flight at such and such a time. And the woman said, well, that doesn't make a difference. I'll just make up the interview. I'll read his book and make up a really great interview. And so we had to get out of there. And then that interview was syndicated all over the United States. It went into 275 newspapers. Mm-hmm. So anyway, those are some of the stories.
Well, the message here is really, you didn't take no for an answer, or at least at times your sidekick, that woman, didn't take no for an answer, and you kind of,
but it was hard
took example
because I wanted to give up, and I was angry, and I said, this is unfair, and I'm entitled to a better break, and I felt sorry, and I shouldn't have to go out and keep putting myself out there and keep getting put down all the time, and I felt those things very intensely.
Yeah. So, what helped you? Because you could have gone a completely different way. You could have gone, forget this, I'll just remain an academic and publish scientific papers.
I was probably just young and stubborn, and sometimes it is good to give up. You don't always have to make something successful. Sometimes it's better to cut your losses. But I really believe that the cognitive therapy had, world-changing potential to change how we think about and treat depression, because I could see it working with so many of my patients. And now I'm equally excited about my new book, Feeling Great, that we just got feedback, as you saw from my wife before the podcast, about one of the chapters. This will be the first true sequel to Feeling Good.
Yeah.
I've published other books, but this is the one with really the new breakthroughs, the new treatment breakthroughs we've talked about
some of that on the podcast. But also, Feeling Good is a little bit showing its age, because I know how we practice now.
Yeah.
Feeling Good is the sketch of that. It's the budding method, but
things have come a million light years since then. That's still a beautiful book, but I'm so excited about the new one. And this time, maybe we can get our listeners to help us and sell a whole lot the first day it comes out and make an impact. But,
sure, yeah.
But anyway, that was an emotional experience for me, the writing of that book and all the people I worked with, and it was just a really special thing, and I'm glad I hung in there. And the day I was on that Phil Donahue show, I was at this Presbyterian Medical Center at the time. I had my practice there, but they didn't give my phone number or location. It wasn't a part of the show.
Yeah.
But so many people found out where I was from and called the hospital. They had tens of thousands of calls, and their phone system shut down. They couldn't handle the volume. It was really a fantastic thing. It also taught me about the power of television. People talk about social media, and I guess that's very powerful. But I have a feeling you still can't beat the power of television. Yeah,
I mean, things have changed, Back then, you had millions of people watching the Phil Donahue show. Now there's so many channels that, it's been splintered a little bit more. Yeah. But yes, you're right. Well, thank you so much. That was a very interesting anecdote. And it's good now and then to shed a little bit of light on how, you got to where you are now. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Fabrice.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.